Hello, hello, dear beloveds. Well, I wanted to go live on this Wednesday morning here in Australia, just because it's been a little while and not exactly how I thought I'd be showing up in our 5th birthday month here for the Institute. July is our celebration of everything Institute and 5 years of being in business. And it's it's a really mixed time to be kind of celebrating, and I mean that specifically for me. I think being based in Melbourne, Australia, where we're seeing this resurgence of COVID-19, as many parts of the world are, and a return to stricter restrictions and return to homeschooling, which is certainly one of the things that I think I dreaded most about whether we would go back into a more restricted quarantine, which is exactly what has occurred. But I understand why it's happening. It just means that my availability and my time, and also the sort of, I guess, the way that I need to use that time has shifted a little bit. We still have so much happening this month to celebrate the Institute turning 5. And a big part of that, of course, is showcasing the women who've walked the path of the 3rd level and really letting them be the demonstration of what we have created as an institute. Because as I say so often, an institute is just an empty thing if there are no students within it. And these women are the reason the institute is what it is and why it shines so brightly. Just to let you know, also I'm live streaming from Zoom because I'm just so frustrated with trying to make the whole kind of room thing work. So if there's questions or comments, I'll try and check in on my phone so I can see. There may not be anything you want to ask me or say, but if there is, then I will try and look on my phone without the noise coming on. We'll see how we go with that. Okay, good morning, everybody. So I wanted to make sure that I did go live at least once this week. And what I'm going to do after today is actually take off until next week off social media, just showing up. There'll still be posts, there'll still be scheduled things happening. But before I disappear for nearly a week, I wanted to really just lean into what I've been feeling since the resurgence of the pandemic in Melbourne specifically, although it seems to be moving out a little bit further than Melbourne, unfortunately, along the east coast of Australia. We'll see what happens with that. And what it sort of brought up with me, well, for me, as someone who I think I learned surrender through gripping very tightly to control and then falling apart and then going, surrender. And that's exactly what happened to me on Sunday. So Wednesday was when the new increased restrictions came in. And really, I guess it's less about what personal freedoms we have or don't have, and more about, for me, a sense of hope and hopelessness. And so I went into a real state of hopelessness very quickly, and I was really interested in that response. So that happened on Sunday. So after a few days of feeling quite anxious and a little bit sort of like, okay, what does this all mean? How am I going to get everything done? And really centering my own experience and getting really kind of very much obsessed about how was I going to cope with all of this. I sort of fell in a heap on Sunday, and that's sort of a bit of my pattern of like, hold, and then the release comes, but usually it comes through this kind of collapse into a heap, but it does its job. And then within a few hours, I was able to course correct myself, and by Monday, I was able to actually make some really good choices. So for me, one of the things that I had noticed creeping back in during this kind of phase of, since the pandemic really arrived, was drinking alcohol, which does not work for me. There was more kind of, celebrations, socializing, even though they were socializing in small, numbers. And so the very first decision I made is that there is no more alcohol for me, because I could see that as a kind of coping mechanism. So that was one thing, committing to be really consistent with my yoga, usually every second day. But when the new restrictions were announced, my yoga studio had to close again. And I just kind of went, well, I'm not doing yoga. Went into that space of like, no, this is all too much. And if I can't have it the way I wanted, I'm not going to do it at all. And recommitting to my practice on the mat, as well as my devotion, which luckily is really consistent, but really ensuring that the quality of all those things are as high as possible. So I guess what I wanted to sort of reflect on more in a more expanded way that you may be experiencing, because it's certainly been my experience, is what happens in these kind of cycles when we are being asked to show up in a really big way. And I wrote somewhere about this sort of feeling like, running a marathon, and then immediately, as soon as you cross the finish line, someone, handing you the baton saying, run again. I don't think they use batons in marathons, but you know what I mean. Basically being asked to run a marathon again. And, another friend observed this idea of last time we did everything right, we seemed to flatten the curve, and it wasn't enough. And it's kind of like, well, what's the reward for doing everything right? Like, what do we get out of this? And there's so many parallels to the blind faith of spiritual development. So often when we turn up to our spiritual seeking, we are very reward motivated. We want to use it for manifestation, or we want to use it for the attainment of something, whether it's even more just being a better person or whatever it is. We're looking to shift or change something. We want to exert some influence on our internal or external reality. And so we'll show up with a discipline or with a commitment that usually is sustained by evidence. So what happens when there is no evidence? What happens when the world, internally and externally, is feeding nothing back to you, and you're not getting that reward for doing the right thing? Let's say in this case, it's about, our spiritual devotion, our showing up to our practice. But if we just expand outwards and look at the pandemic as really a really wonderful opportunity to practice our spiritual devotion, if you like, an extreme spiritual opportunity or lesson that's been granted by some great teacher to go further. So my yoga teacher was sharing this analogy of, when we cultivate spiritual discipline, we might do that in the, once upon a time inside of the monastery or the safe quarters of an ashram. But then at some point we're asked to go out into the world and meditate, sitting in a cave in the snow, or standing in the center of the fire, or standing on one leg for 2 days, or something more extreme to challenge our commitment and our devotion and our capacity to sustain our focus, even when everything around us seems to be not conducive. And I feel very strongly that, this pandemic is an accelerated awakening opportunity if we're willing to wrestle with it. And part of that willingness is to allow ourselves to go through those cycles. So if I said to you, every day since this pandemic began and changed everything in my life and probably everything in everybody else's lives, I have been able to sustain a spiritual devotion and a resilience that would blow you away with how amazingly ultra spiritual I am, to use a JPC's term. But that's absolute utter bullshit. There have been, what I can now see in hindsight, absolute cycles where the capacity to sustain myself is really, really easy, because actually the conditions are perfect, because I don't have to go anywhere. I can't distract myself with anything. I can sit inside of this beautiful container of the world in its kind of contracted state and find a space for my devotion that wouldn't necessarily be there if I was traveling around the world or doing lots of great things, or going to speaking events or festivals, or, all of the great things, but they are ultimately distractions from that interior life. There are also days where in this cycle where I am in despair and I'm like, I don't know how to sustain myself. I don't know what else is going to be taken away from me. I feel hopeless. How am I supposed to raise my children properly in these circumstances? The fact that I want to kind of exit from all of it, it's all part of it. And I think that's been one of the most beautiful things about this second phase of what's happening here in Melbourne, is that it's really given me this opportunity to see both my resistance to that cycle as well as the truth of that cycle. So for me, this is absolutely vital for me to sustain myself through it, to acknowledge with humility and grace that there will be days where I can handle this. And in fact, I'll be the cheerleader for others, and I'll be high-fiving, and I'll be going live, and I'll be saying, come on, we can do this, we can do hard things, to quote Glennon Doyle. And there will be other days where I cannot talk to you. I cannot stop my crying. I cannot give you any hope because I don't feel any hope. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad spiritual person or that I have failed. It just simply means that I am letting the waves of this global consciousness awakening move me and alter me. Now, if I tried to hold on to any of those things and make any of them more important than other, either the high or the low, then I would be creating a problem. If I expected of myself to stay high and light throughout this entire experience, then I would undoubtedly burn out and cause havoc for myself and everyone around me. If I'm willing to roll with this and allow myself to be moved by it, so I'm rolling with the waves of human collective unfolding and my own individual unfolding within that, but ultimately there's only one of us here. Without judgment, I'm just letting it all flow through me. And I'm not trying to necessarily make meaning or pull it all together or have a solution or fix it and to try to resolve it with a pretty bow and wrap it all up and say, this is what it all means. And I think this is the real crux of what I wanted to share with you this time is this second kind of intake. I don't want to use the word wave because I think that has a sort of more medical meaning that I'm not trying to suggest, but this resurgence of the virus in Melbourne in particular has been such a great opportunity for humility around understanding that we are not in control, that we may never be able to figure out how best to manage this, that there may not be an end point to this anytime soon, that there isn't necessarily something to work towards, that we can't be goal-oriented around this. I can't be goal-oriented around this. The reward for doing the right thing may never come, or it may be months and months and months, if not years away. And how do I sustain myself? How do I inspire that spiritual resilience where I am able to sit with the truth, the beautiful adage, this too shall pass. Now, that statement is often shared with people when they're in crisis, when their marriage ends or someone they love dies or there's something catastrophic happens in a person's life. We'll say, this too shall pass. But the truth of that statement is that even in your highest, best, most glorious moment, you need to be able to say that without fear. That is non-attachment. There's a learned detachment from form, from the 3D. This too shall pass. Best day ever. This too shall pass. Worst day ever. This too shall pass. This is the nature of human experience. And that, for me, that is the counsel that I need to offer myself, is that I might be grumpy and frustrated and sitting in my victim like, I thought we had moved beyond this. I want it to be a certain way. That shadow archetype of the victim who was trying to tell my story over the weekend. And that's cool because remember, I'm cyclical by nature. Some days I'm my victim and some days I'm the opposite of my victim. The guardian of the shadow of the victim is the guardian of self-esteem. And to be able to say to myself, Ricky, you've got this. I love you. Today might be hard. Tomorrow might be better, but maybe it won't. And this too shall pass. And to stay in that space of humility that it's not necessarily going to look anything like any of us want it to look. And can we still be faithful within that? Can we stay wedded to our faith? Now, losing faith is a really great way to remind yourself of where you're being faithless. So on Sunday, where I felt that sense of despair and hopelessness and faithlessness, it was the most powerful course corrector there was. And instead of just trying to, kind of roll with it and be in a slightly anxious state, low level anxiety, just kind of managing and sustaining myself, but not really being present and kind of trying to evacuate my experience as much as possible with whatever addictions to avoid it, to actually fall into a heap can be that most beautiful, humbling experience of how actually I wasn't living faithfully. And this is how I can course correct myself, all without judgment. All without judgment. This is the thing about being a cyclical creature, is that, from every level of our being, the 5D down to the 3D, we are cyclical, and women in particular, we cycle. This is something that's come up in conversation with the third level priestesses right now, is that if we're not aware of our own bodily cycle as women, then it's very unlikely that we'll be able to be aware of our spiritual cycles, our emotional cycles, and the triggers for what moves us in and out of those cycles, and then the cycles of the mother around us, Mother Gaia. And then, looking at ourselves as cyclical creatures, I think, is just such a powerful antidote to our suffering, where every time something comes around, if we get surprised like goldfish in a bowl, of course we're going to become exhausted by ourselves. But if we can find ways to manage or even track our cycles with compassion and love, and to recognize that what goes up must come down, and that's not a failure. In every big spiritual awakening you integrate that new normal, and then your new set point is at that level. That doesn't mean that you're actually losing or becoming less woke or awakened. It simply means you've learned to integrate a higher vibration, a higher consciousness, and then you'll forget, because it becomes normal. And then if you have a day where you fall into a heap, it's so easy to then undermine or erase all of your evolution. And yet, if we can map out our cycles of spiritual awakening, our cycles within our body, the cycles of the seasons, and to recognize all of the ways in which we move through consciousness, or consciousness moves through us, then we'll save ourselves so much trouble. That's why I love to journal, keeping a record of myself. But then I need to review that. I need to remind myself. And I think that's one of the ways that I can kind of fall down, is, falling into these heaps and then going into judgment immediately. That's my kind of immediate kind of response, is I fall into this judgment of myself for having failed. And then I remember humility, compassion, grace, giving myself permission to be where I'm at, to feel what I'm feeling. Just feel it, just feel it. When one of my littlest child hurts himself or gets upset because something goes wrong, I hold him and I'm like, just feel it, baby. And inevitably his cries will get louder before they get softer. But I recognize the need for that catharsis, for that release, which might have nothing to do with him stubbing his toe or the computer not working the way he wants it to. But there's a need for us to let these waves of energy move through us. And, sobbing and wailing and crying, when it comes, I'm teaching myself more and more to just let it move me, to alter me, to move through me. I know I'm touching on lots of things here, but I really just sort of wanted to share with as much transparency and vulnerability as I can, where I've been this last week since the restrictions in Melbourne increased. And I'm aware, watching around the world, that there is a sort of resurgence of the virus in lots of places. And that will be bringing up lots of fear for lots of people, particularly because we like to have a sense of control. So the big question here is, what if for the next, who knows how long future, there is no authority, we have no control, we don't get to decide where we go or when we go or what we do or who we do it with, and it's all out of our hands? How do we remain faithful within that? And I think for me, I'm learning a lot about myself right now in this accelerated way, and I'm so grateful for that. And that is, not to avoid it, to sit with it, get radically accepting of it, to absolutely embrace it, to let myself feel it and feel it in its fullest expression. If I'm starting to feel teary, why not we just chuck on a sad movie and just let it all out, like really grieve it, let it move through you. Then once that catharsis has happened, look at what it's offering in terms of where can I course correct? Where can I deepen my devotion? Where can I change some of my patterns? Where can I get more faithful? And then to just let that energy hold you and to sustain you. And in my meditation this morning, I felt so held in a way that I really hadn't. I've been doing my devotion, of course, every morning. That's my job, to show up regardless. But this morning, it was so clear to me that I was being held. And I think part of what I'd been doing in the last couple of weeks in my slightly low-level anxious response to everything was this: I'm meditating, I'm doing it, I'm ticking all the boxes, and actually kind of missing the point of showing up to our devotion, which is to expand into that greater sense of something is holding me. Now, once again, no judgment. There are going to be days you show up to meditation which feel like God is literally in you, around you, everything is full of grace, and other days where you're like, oh, why am I doing this? Why can't I just go and get my coffee now? And this morning was one of those moments of absolute grace infusing me. And I'm so grateful for that. And that is, you know, it's the blind faith of spiritual devotion. And it's kind of the blind faith of living in a pandemic, which of course all is one. Everything that we're going through right now is the ultimate spiritual exercise. It is our dharma. It is right for us to be engaging with this at the spiritual level, because everything is spiritual, and to sit with the discomfort of it all, and to recognize that some days you'll be the cheerleader and some days you'll need others to do that for you, or you just need to just let yourself hang out in that space. As Caroline Myss advises us, we can have 5 minutes of self-pity. Now, your 5 minutes might be 5 days, or it might be 5 hours, but there needs to be a time where we go, what will you do with your pain? And for me, a big part of overcoming that feeling of despair on Sunday, and this was even before I found out about homeschooling, being back on the cards, was to ask for help. And it's so hard for me to ask for help. But the first thing I did was reach out to my mama, who worked with me with intuitive intelligence tapping, and that was amazing. And then my ex-partner, I shared what I was feeling, and you know, he very, very generously offered to step in with additional time with the children, because his work's flexible and mine's not. But all of that couldn't happen until I had sort of fallen into that space. If I was still in problem-solving mode and in that low-level anxiety, trying to figure it all out, I wouldn't have become soft and vulnerable enough to actually say, actually, you don't need to figure all of this out on your own. And showing up to God in that same way right now. I don't know how to do this, but I'm willing, and I need you to be with me. And that really was my prayer going to sleep last night and the last few nights, and waking up this morning, recognizing as well, and this is the last thing I'm going to share. Thank you for letting me share, because this is, you know, so much my medicine, and I'm hoping in some small way it's of benefit to you as well, to hear what it's like, I guess, maybe just to see how I'm going through it. I'm really interested in how people are managing themselves, their mental health, their spiritual health in this pandemic. And so I want to share with you what's happening for me. That one of the things that can be so easy to do is to entrain entrain ourselves to the dominant frequency. And right now, the dominant frequency on the planet is fear. And our media makes it really easy for us to buy into fear mongering. There's literally minute by minute headlines and updates on the pandemic, and reporting of information that's sort of disproportionate. There's this idea of false equivalence where, you know, this is obviously a global pandemic, but the way things are reported is actually just so hugely out of proportion, in terms of, you know, if this was another kind of flu that was being reported, or these numbers are compelling, but they're not necessarily unusual for a flu virus. So I have no judgment about it. I know this is something we have to take really seriously, but I guess the idea of entraining to the dominant frequency can happen when we're not being careful about how and what we tune into. And that reminder came in my devotion this morning of, not only do I not have to go into resonance with the dominant frequency around me, that I actually can cultivate a frequency that others can entrain to. And when I saw myself this morning in meditation, it was literally like I was breathing in and out particles of gold light from my lungs, so that my lungs were the lungs of the entire planet, and I was purifying the entire planet with my with every breath. And that actually I have the capacity not just to receive, and in fact that is not my superpower at all, but to create. And that we can become slightly morbidly obsessed with worst case scenario as a human collective. I'm not sure if you've noticed this in yourself. I certainly see it in myself, that there's almost this kind of weird sick pleasure in seeing the numbers rise on how bad is this going to get. And I know that may seem really dark, but I think that's part of human nature, is that we are actually really interested in the underbelly. If you pick up the rock, what's underneath, and looking at those things, and especially when the media are reporting it in this kind of almost like a competitive, how bad can it get? Who's going to be the worst? Who's going to have the worst numbers? You know, we can do it in the positive as well, but I do think that we can have this morbid obsession where we can easily dip our consciousness unintentionally into holding the potential for the worst case scenario rather than the best case scenario. And an example of this was, you know, before this this resurgence of the virus happened in Melbourne, almost every person I spoke to said there'll be a second wave, there will be a second wave, there will be a second wave. And I would never reply or comment or express an opinion. But as I was listening to this, I thought, this is inevitable, because so many people keep confirming that this is going to happen, and that fourth dimension that draws down from the fifth dimension is language, and the feeling behind that language. Now, why were they saying that? Were they saying that because they'd read it in the media? What highly informed expert opinion were they relying upon? Or was it just something that people were saying because of their own fear that we would go back into this? So I am reminding myself that not only do I get to create a frequency that others can choose to entrain into, that I am very conscious of where I place my attention, because that is my intention for my reality. Now, that doesn't mean that if I decide there's no pandemic, there's no pandemic. I'm radically accepting of the conditions of the world, but am I going to lower my vibration to match the dominant frequency on the planet, or am I going to cultivate a frequency that does hold a higher potential, whatever that potential is, without needing to know, without resolving, without fixing? Okay, so finally, in the phase of, in the age of a pandemic, how does one celebrate an institute's fifth birthday? Well, we're just doing what we're doing. Is it okay to celebrate right now? Is it okay to feel joy? Is it okay to have vision and dreams and to want to grow things right now? And the answer for me is yes, yes, yes. I mean, part of that is how we sustain a high and light vibration. And yes, our visions are probably rapidly changing as the world changes around us, but that's part of it. You know, necessity is the mother of invention, and that is a beautiful thing, to be able to roll with that and to let your vision grow and become more congruent. The world is not unchanged. Let your vision be changed by the world. Let yourself expand and grow. Let yourself become more known to yourself through everything I've shared around cycles and becoming witness to your own experience. And, you know, dream in congruence with this new waking reality. How may I be of service is such a powerful question. So part of celebrating right now is absolutely that we are not afraid to feel all the things. We are not afraid to feel the joy and the sadness, the grief and the hope, the despair and the wonder all at once. And so, yes, we will continue with our fifth birthday celebrations and let them be a balm for you. I hope you are able to be sustained and nurtured by what we have created, perhaps for these times. Perhaps we're reaching our fifth birthday and a level of maturity right now because it was all divinely fated that we be here, that we be ready to serve, that the women who've walked through the programs of the Institute, and in particular the third level, are in the world and able to hold the space that is so desperately needed right now. So we have lots of beautiful things coming up. There is a newsletter going out today that will detail them. Facebook events on this page will also share that with you. And next Tuesday, I will be running the third level circle as an open circle for the first time ever. Anyone can join our beautiful inner sanctum of our third level circle, and I'll share the details of that with you. But yeah, thank you for letting me receive my medicine by sharing with you right now. And I hope that's brought you some insight to your own experience, or just something to give you some succor and some comfort right now, because today I can be a cheerleader. Who knows how tomorrow will be, but with spiritual stamina and resilience, you know, I can stay out of judgment of it all and just let it roll through me, and just let this beautiful time of accelerated human awakening serve me and serve all of us if we're willing to be humble, if I'm willing to be humble enough to let go of that illusion of control and just say, okay, I don't know what's happening, but this too shall pass, and I'm willing. So much love to you all.